Excellent. Well, thank you, everyone. Welcome. My name is Christine Hess, and I am the Executive Director for the Nevada Housing Coalition, and I so appreciate your time this morning. I am very much looking forward to the conversation and discussion. Please feel free to use the chat. You are all in listen mode only, and the webinar is being recorded. A copy of the slides and the recording will be distributed to all attendees and actually to all registered today. I know that quite a few people might be on vacation or just had something else come up, so couldn't be live with us, but we will be posting it on our YouTube channel. Additionally, so please feel free to use the chat for any questions. Also, please feel free to use the chat to just introduce yourselves and let everybody know you're here. So grateful to have you present and looking forward to a good conversation today. I am going to kick it off with an introduction to Mendy Elliott. Mendy Elliott is with Capital Partners, and she had represented the coalition this year for our lobbying and policy support, especially towards the end of the session. Mendy and I worked very closely, and also with Nick in this strange session, by the way, which Mendy's going to talk a bit about, but really appreciate her expertise. And we continue to work with Mendy and her team around the interim work and policy support efforts going forward. Mendy has about 30 years experience in affordable housing from the private sector, finance. She was the director of business and industry at one point. So we really depend on her to help us navigate the policy waters. So Mendy, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Christine, and thanks everyone for joining today. As Christine alluded to, it was an interesting session. I have I'm kind of a policy wonk, so we have some data as it relates to the session, just for your interest, and then we'll get into the bills. Next slide, Christine. So there were 1,181 bill draft requests. The total bills that were introduced were 958, 495 in the Assembly and 463 in the Senate. Needless to say, we were really busy reading bills. A lot of bills were introduced. 534 bills were actually passed, and 4 bills were vetoed. Assembly had 272, and Senate bill had 262 bills that passed. Bills passed as a percentage was 55%, but we still had, even with the issues that we had during the session, we had 705 registered lobbyists. Believe it or not, there's normally about 1,200 lobbyists. So this session, they were a little down. So there were 705 of us still working in the building on various bills and policy issues. Next slide. So just to give you a little bit of a little more background, the session started on February 1st. We were totally virtual until April 15th. So if you could imagine, we were having Zoom meetings with legislators, we were testifying virtually or by phone. We were thinking outside of the box how we could engage with legislators. It was actually pretty fascinating to work within the confines during the COVID issues. And we sine died on May 31st. There was not a special session. We all thought there'd be an extra few days, but they finished their work right on time on May 31. So the Nevada legislative priorities, there was a lot of bills around business employment law. No surprise as it relates to people trying to get back to work, trying to make sure that people were safe in employment as they were employed. A lot of education bills, healthcare, criminal justice reform, of course, election reform. There were some great bills on renewable energy that passed that Senator Burks worked really hard on. And of course, we had a lot of housing bills, both on affordable as well as the landlord tenant. Christine had asked me, were there more than usual on the housing side? So I went back a few sessions. So in 2017, we really had 4 bills that were affordable housing. And in 2019, we had 5 bills that were affordable housing. And in 2021, we had probably at least 10 bills, 8 to 10 bills that many of them didn't get a hearing or Some of them were ideas that the Assembly would have and the Senate would have, and then they would collapse into a bill. But a lot more discussion this session about affordable housing. Some of it, I think, might be in 2019, we established the Nevada Housing Advisory Committee, and they had their own bill, and we'll talk about their bill, which passed. But the good news is housing is becoming more of a topic. And as we discuss it, we're actually coming up or defining some very robust opportunities for the state, both from a development standpoint as well as tenants and how we can work together with the realtors, the apartment association, as well as legal services. We were all trying to work together, sometimes not greatly, but for the most part, working together to try and figure out how we could navigate the waters, especially under COVID. And of course, we had cannabis. We now have public lounges for cannabis, if that's of interest to you. That was something that's been tried several sessions, but this session, so they'll, depending on where you live, you may have a cannabis lounge coming right to your neighborhood soon. Go ahead, Christine. So as we look at the Nevada Housing Coalition, they had a really a comprehensive policy approach. Christine has the bills there that were there, 5 priority bills. AB, is that 331? AB 331, which set a 5-year target for affordable housing. Assemblywoman Marzola, that bill had a hearing but didn't move. Senate Bill 12, which was, I just talked about, that was the Housing Advisory Committee. This bill will help as we mitigate the loss of existing affordable housing. The bill actually takes effect in October. They are hoping, though, the Nevada Housing Division is already talking to those particular individuals that have affordable housing in their portfolio, the developers and landlords, about the fact that their maturity dates are coming up as it relates to the 30-year for their tax credit responsibility. And we're hoping to maintain those, the affordability of those particular projects. The bill was really, the impetus of the bill was there was a project that fell out of affordability, and there were 200 units in Northern Nevada. And we all of a sudden, we had this aha moment. The Housing Coalition had an aha moment of, oh my gosh, we have all these potential affordable housing units that potentially could no longer be affordable. So the SB 12 was a Housing Advisory Committee bill, and it passed. It's an excellent bill. SB 284 was a bill that currently we have, the state has a set aside for some affordable housing tax credits. This bill removed the deadline, the sunset for those tax credit, partially because we were having an issue with, because of COVID, of dealing with the ability to actually do development within Nevada. So we are, that bill provided the sunset on those tax credits, and we'll be able to utilize those moving forward. AB 334 was a linkage bill, and again, that was sponsored by Chandra Summers Armstrong. They would expand the existing toolbox for the local jurisdictions. AB 331 and AB 334 had hearings, but that's as far as they went. There is a big thank you, though, to the Boyd School of Law and Professor Edwards and his team, as they were able to, and that was a public policy clinic, as they were able to provide a lot of the data necessary for the bill to actually be drafted. And so his team put a lot of heart and soul and helped the Nevada Housing Coalition as we were developing those two particular pieces of legislation. AB 117 prohibits landlords refusing tenant based on source of income. That bill 317 was would not allow a landlord, and I think that bill is going to come back next session. For instance, if you receive your income from the state or from a federal Social Security, you can't use that to discriminate as it relates to landlord tenant issues. Next slide, sorry. SB 12, we talked about SB 284. SB 12 SB 284, it allowed, we already talked about that bill, was sponsored by Senator Ratty, and it allowed
Mendy,
for, yes.
Excuse me, Mendy, these are just the information that will be included in the deck for everybody afterwards that gives more
Perfect.
details for what you gave before. Sorry about that.
That's all right. There's more detail on those bills, and those are the two bills. There are a couple of bills that I do want to talk about. SB 311, which is a Nevada rural housing bill. The coalition was very involved in that bill, and that bill allowed the Nevada rural housing under NRS 315. Nevada rural housing was prohibited with actually developing market rate products out in the rural areas. For instance, if a mining company wanted to partner with Nevada rural housing to build workforce housing, they couldn't do it. This bill allows Nevada rural housing to build market rate product. The benefit to that is that the market rate products will not displace affordable housing. There'll be new construction in Winnemucca and Elko and Yarrington, wherever the potential might be, Fernley. So this was a really good bill, and Senator Ratty sponsored it, and the Nevada Housing Coalition worked really hard to make sure that that bill passed. The bill, the final bill that I want to talk about, and we have a lot on the agenda, is Assembly Bill 486. Assembly Bill 486 is you're going to hear a lot about that bill over the course of the next couple of days. Today at 4 o'clock, Governor Sisolak is going to be providing an update on that, which ends the CDC eviction moratorium, but more importantly, the implementation of Nevada's new eviction prevention legislation. AB 446 was literally passed in the dead of night by Ways and Means, and it provides a roadmap for tenants as well as landlords as how the courts will be handling potential evictions moving forward as it relates to creating a mediation process. Part of the reason that the bill was important is we still have funding that's coming in from ARP funds for eviction mediation. We have several $1 million that have been rolled out already. The counties, the housing authorities are doing a great job of working with the tenants and the landlords, but there still needs to be a little more time. And hopefully AB 486 will provide that the roadmap so that we can continue to keep people in their homes and to avoid eviction. Christine, and I think, is there anything else you want me to add on 486? We're going to learn more tonight at 4 o'clock, but we have we certainly have the Guinn Center on here that's been doing an outstanding job of tracking some of this information. And so just wanted to give everybody a quick update. I had 10 minutes, so hopefully I stayed within my time.
You did a great job. Thank you so much, Mendy. And yes, I am going to tee up the Guinn Center's conversation because I'll kind of speaks to a lot of the calls and questions that I receive as the director for the Nevada Housing Coalition around the status of our evictions, which of course, we are grateful for AB 486 to be in place. And quite honestly, Nevada leads the nation in this legislation. I was really excited last month to be in a national conversation and talk about AB 486 and really it being a model of how the country can be more proactive in making sure the dollars get out the door as intended and people get help, most importantly, to stay in their homes. But before I do that, I'm just going to share my screen really quick because all of you on here have probably tuned in January to get a preview of the legislative session. And I just want to let you know the work of policy and advocacy is one of our 3 main priorities here at the coalition. And you can get involved too. One, coming to the conference, there'll be a lot of education opportunities. Additionally, this is where we have our annual member meeting, and we will definitely be diving into the session and kind of the details you heard here more in depth to understand how we really move things forward in the next state session. You can join NHC as a member. We appreciate your membership. Memberships start as low as $120 for nonprofits and government, and then $250 for businesses. But you're really supporting the work that the coalition does, and we appreciate your membership. We're well over 100 members now, and we continue to grow. As you all know, we're pretty young. And then also, once you're a member, you can consider being part of the policy committee, which really puts you on the front end of any proposed policy solutions for the 2023 session. And then Mandy, of course, will be helping and working with the coalition as we work through the interim with all of our stakeholders to make sure that we have all of the perspectives at the table. So thank you so much. With that, it is my pleasure to tee up our next conversation. So as we discussed, Nevada has already deployed $108 million of its coronavirus relief funds for emergency rental assistance, which we're grateful the state, Clark County, all pooled together some money to and other local jurisdictions to help Nevadans in need when the pandemic first hit. And they're currently working to distribute funds from the next $380 million of assistance that was specifically approved by the federal government. You'll hear these funds referred to as ERA-1 or ERA-2, right? Emergency Rental Assistance 1 that was approved in December as part of the Consolidated Appropriations Act, and ERA-2 that was approved as part of the American Rescue Plan. As Mindy indicated, with AB 486, we're hopeful not only to make sure we utilize all the federal dollars for rental assistance as they were intended, but that we help keep Nevadans in their homes and avoid evictions. That said, the CDC moratorium on evictions is ending in just a few days, and there could still be reasons for evictions, even though AB 486 is in place. The coalition, like many others, are trying to follow evictions, but with every court acting independently in Nevada and no central place for data access at any point, it's a challenge. I get calls all the time, how are things going with evictions? And I have to make a whole bunch of calls to find out at that exact moment in time what's going on. However, today I'm super grateful to welcome Dr. Kenneth Retzel, with Associate Director with the Guinn Center. The Guinn Center recently updated their analysis on evictions, just this week. And I really want to thank Dr. Retzel for coming on today, Wednesday, last minute, but the information is so relevant and timely. I know they're the questions I'm getting, that you're asking, and that you're also getting. So thank you so much, Dr. Retzel. And welcome. Oh, you might be on mute.
Yep, sorry, I was on mute. You would think after all this time I'd learn how to use Zoom, but yeah. So Christine, thank you for the introduction, and thanks to everyone who's on this call doing very important work in the state of Nevada. Like I said, I am Kenny Retzel. I guess that's the new title. The Guinn Center is rather small, and especially during the pandemic, we have sort of been crossing streams in terms of the areas that we work on. In many times I am working in education, but as many of you know, a lot of these social issues cross sectors, right? And so education and housing are often intimately linked. But so today in our time together, I want to try to put some of the numbers to this eviction risk conversation that's going on. So next slide, Christine. So as some of you may know, in July 2020, the Guinn Center partnered with the Center for Eviction Defense Project to estimate the number of Nevadans at risk of eviction by the end of 2020. At that time, we estimated that as many as 118,000 to 142,000 households could struggle to pay the rent. And that 118 to 142,000 represented approximately 271 to 327,000 individuals. Those projections were updated in August 2020, not by us, but the Center for Eviction Defense Project partnered with the Aspen Institute, and they estimated at that time that 182,000 to 218,000 households in Nevada faced eviction risk by December 2020. So it had gone up, and that then represented between 419 to 501,000 individuals. So I think important to note that the discussion that we're having today, that the Guinn Center, the actual report that we did was that one from July 2020. And then so the rest of the data that we're going to talk about today is data that we've collected from other sources. And that July 2020 was basically assumptions that were made to project out eviction risk, right? When data was harder to come by, or, you know, actual data, tangible data was harder to come by. And so I think what you'll see, hopefully you'll agree with me, is that this real-time census data that we'll look at here in a second does seem to be aligned with the demand for assistance that social service agencies are reporting. But we'll look at that here in just a few additional slides. Next slide, Christine. So it wouldn't be a Guinn Center presentation without a lot of data, and I promise I won't read all of this to you, but the thing that I want to highlight on this slide is that data from the Clark County Housing Assistance Program, or CHAP, which was established to provide rental assistance funding using CARES Act money, indicates that approximately 88,830 households have received rental assistance since the program launched. And then, as the next slide will suggest, that funding was targeted at areas determined to be most in need. Next slide, Christine. So this one, there's two slides, and I think there's an interesting reason for that I'll talk about here in a second. But the way that you can read this is that the slide on the left shows areas of higher need, right? And so the darker the blue, the higher the need. And then the one on the right shows the percentage of, or the approximate percentage of households receiving that CHAP rental assistance. So the darker the purple, the higher the proportion. But I think one of the things that we struggle with, especially when we're working with data and this sort of household level data, is that it doesn't ever come to us in the same way. And so sometimes we get data by zip code, which is often the most useful because that's what we often interact with, right? We know where zip codes are. But then a lot of the federal data that we get that actually shows sort of more individual level data comes at the census tract level. And so if you actually superimpose these two maps over one another, they wouldn't match completely. But again, I think it goes back to that difficulty of trying to find accurate data and data that is meaningful when you're trying to compare zip code data to census tract data. And in Las Vegas, it's probably not as big of a deal, right? Like you can see the variation here, but the problem becomes when you start looking at rural Nevada, which basically is, and this isn't an exaggeration, is one census tract. And so then you're looking and trying to determine Elko, Ely, and Caliente, right? They probably all have different levels of need, but when you look at it, it gets all grouped together as one. So next slide. Thank you. So at the risk of further inundating you with data, I think this slide best highlights the difficulty of the current conversation. And so if you recall, right, the CHAP data reported that approximately 88,000 households received rental assistance. But if you go back to our July 2020 report, we estimated that approximately 118,000 households were at risk of eviction. And so at the risk of being Captain Obvious, right, the risk of eviction is different than those who are actually reaching out for actual services, right? And so during the pandemic, we started seeing surveys come out, and this is from the US Census Bureau Household Pulse data. And they ask 3 different questions. And I think each of them, going back to that previous conversation or what I just said about the difficulty in this data, is that eviction risk can be defined any number of ways. And so so eviction data, or risk of eviction, the household Pulse data asks 3 different questions that, again, I think each of them can be capturing a portion of individual risk. And so they ask 3 questions. One about, is the individual likely to be evicted from their home in the next 2 months? Another question is, are they caught up on their rent? And then the third question is the confidence that they could pay next month's rent. So each of them, again, being a component of eviction risk. The results are here on this slide, but I think just to highlight what it is, in the sake of brevity, in September 2020, approximately 45,000 renter households in Nevada said they were likely to be evicted from their home within 2 months. In December, that increased to almost 80,000 households who said that they were likely to be evicted from their home within 2 months. And then in June 2021, that has decreased, but still a high number at 50,500 renter households that said they were likely to be evicted from their home within 2 months. Next slide, Christine. And this slide is from a separate analysis that the Guinn Center did. And it looked at housing and unemployment right after the Great Recession, to see what we could learn or possibly apply to this current economic situation. And so as you'll see, the dotted line shows the unemployment rate, and the solid yellow line shows the summary eviction filings. And you can see even when the unemployment rate starts to drop in 2010, 11, and 12, you start seeing this uptick in evictions. And so we are hypothesizing, I don't know, are suggesting possibly that even as Nevada's economy begins its recovery under this current one, you still could see evictions increasing even though the economy is increasing. And then I think the other interesting thing that this graph shows is the use of summary evictions over time. And so again, yellow line being the Nevada average or Nevada totals, the purple line being Clark County, and then the gray line at the very bottom, gray solid line, being in Washoe County. And so what you see is that summary eviction filings increased in Clark County by 92% between 2000 and 2019, whereas in Washoe County, they decreased by 66%. And so you see that sort of general trend line going down between the period 2000 to 2019. I think the Guinn Center is monitoring this, right? And it's one of those things that we are still trying to wrap our head around of what all of this means. But hopefully we can come back and talk to you guys more as we learn more. Next slide, Christine. In the meantime, here's our contact information. Happy to answer any questions that you might have. We've got our email address right there. Hopefully we can continue this conversation going forward. And thank you for all the hard work that you guys are doing on behalf of Nevadans.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Retzel. Thank you so much, Kenny. Yes, please put your questions in the chat. And while we may not get to them live today, the Guinn Center can follow up and the coalition will follow up. I appreciate your insights into the data. I know that you literally, it's hot off the presses, all this analysis that the Guinn Center has done. So thank you so much for the work. And as you all can see, the question around what's happening with our evictions is more complex than just a simple answer, but that is something that the coalition is monitoring. And of course, we support the work of all our partners to get out the emergency rental assistance and appreciate all the work that's being done there. And we'll be tuning into the press conference this afternoon. Thanks, Mindy, for pointing that out for us all. Next on our agenda, I am going to just talk about an opportunity that is also a follow-up for all of you that may have tuned in on May 6th. So, and that is regarding the American Rescue Plan funding. This is work that the coalition is working on. And again, our Nevada Housing Coalition Policy Committee members are deeply engaged in this effort. But I just want to talk about what's been going on because I'm going to need your help. Everybody here on this webinar can actually play a part and be a part of some real meaningful and lasting impacts for affordable housing. So on May 6th, we kicked off a webinar, which when you get these slides, you'll have a link to the webinar on our YouTube channel. And Treasurer Conine talked about the Every Nevadan Recovery Framework that was put together by Nevada leadership, including the treasurer, and actually asks all of us, including you, for your opinion on how the state may potentially utilize its fiscal recovery funds that are part of the American Rescue Plan Act that was passed in March. There's actually a Google form at the end of the Every Nevadan Recovery Framework that you can put your ideas in there. Additionally, we heard some excellent analysis by Nevada Grant Labs and by Corporation for Supportive Housing around potential considerations for Nevada as we move forward. Nevada, the Interim Finance Committee, which the money is flowing, has been received $2.7 billion in June for Nevada that, of course, we hope initially will shore up any budget shortfalls and meet some of the extra health expenses by COVID and all of those things. But there are some discretionary funding, and affordable housing is one of the eligible uses of those funds. And as we know, housing has been a big conversation in the pandemic as we've seen our populations, and we're feeling it. We just heard that discussion from the Guinn Center around people who have been impacted. And it's because of their housing insecurity already, in addition to those who weren't insecure before but may have lost their jobs or income. But Nevada was already in a precarious place, and the pandemic, of course, pushed too many people over the edge. So we asked you all in May how should and how much and how could the state potentially prioritize its fiscal recovery funds. And with that, we started to lead a conversation. We launched a collaborative initiative and put together a task force of over 70 people. And that includes NHC members, definitely our policy members and board members. It includes stakeholders from our private sector, builders, developers, market rate, nonprofit, community service providers, our healthcare providers, economic development, finance sector, advocates. What I want you to know is this is a group that is really diverse and covers a broad spectrum because there is so much interest in housing. As we all know, it is linked to so many other outcomes. The task force has been working. We convened first June 3rd, and we have been working with some meetings and other efforts. And I just wanted to update everybody on that, because what you're going to see is a recommendation from the Nevada Housing Coalition on how we think the state could spend some of its fiscal recovery funds from the American Rescue Plan Act. So that's the ARPA, how they can spend some of their ARPA funds on affordable housing. And just to put it in perspective, right? States across the country are allocating between $100 million and $600 million or more of their fiscal recovery funds for affordable housing, right? So what dollar amount does Nevada land on? So on May 6th, we talked about it, but then we also asked what role does affordable housing play with the priorities of the Every Nevadan Recovery Framework? And we polled. You'll see that I love polls, and these are the results of that poll, right? Everybody acknowledged, or 86% of those present on May 6th acknowledged that supporting disadvantaged communities by investing in affordable housing, we could impact this priority of the Every Nevadan Recovery Framework. So we have that top of mind as we move forward. We do appreciate the state and how it has outlined priorities for the use of these funds. I just want to kind of put out there the questions that the task force has been considering, right? How can this once in a generation funding have long lasting and meaningful impacts on Nevada's affordable housing needs? How much? You know, is it 100 million? Is it 800 million? Is it somewhere in the middle? How much should Nevada leadership consider dedicating to affordable housing? And how in the affordable housing, all the different initiatives that could happen, how should that look? So these are the things that we've been discussing as a task force in depth over the last 8 weeks, I guess you could say. 6 to 8 weeks, it's been fast. So this was on the left-hand side, you'll see the results of a poll from May 6th that on how you all thought, and that helped that we should prioritize dollars for affordable housing. And on the right-hand side, you'll see how it worked with the task force. We put together 4 working teams to really dive into what it means to potentially commit American Rescue Plan funding for multifamily rentals, for permanent supportive housing, for the preservation of our existing affordable housing, and of course, affordable home ownership, which you can see these relate directly to the responses received May 6th. From there, the group took also the information from May 6th that you might have sent to the coalition because I asked for it. And we additionally collected more information from task force members around different ideas. We brainstormed. There were 22 different ideas. And then we prioritized those ideas and put them into buckets. And we worked among our teams to say, does that make sense? Can we really make this happen? And should we be prioritizing this and having that bigger conversation? And I do want to say that all of these ideas will be included in our final recommendation. We don't want to self-censor. You know, we don't know what leadership is going to think is important, but they do most all of them will also fit within these larger buckets. And we've really come down to 4 buckets that I'll talk about in terms of funding that we're looking at prioritizing. So we are in the final stretch. Just last week or a week and a half ago, the task force met. Enterprise Community Partners and Corporation for Supportive Housing provided gap and cost analysis, because when I started with the task force, I said, okay, task force, how much should we commit? And everyone said, well, I don't know. How much does it cost? How much do we really need? And so on July 15th, we heard some analysis from Enterprise, from Corporation for Supportive Housing. And this is just an example, of what we looked at. Enterprise said, here's our urban rental housing gap, here's the rural. So we also were thinking about it from different perspectives of our state and what that could look like. We had a whole hour discussion on this, so it was pretty intense and presentation. Additionally, we asked the Nevada Housing Division to provide information, and thank you so much. I saw Betsy was on here. She's just rock star. I know they have so much going on, but Betsy and Dwight from the Nevada Housing Division brought forward information and statistics on current programs, how much housing we're producing, for example, in our greatest deficit area, which is below 30% area median income. So they gave us some information there and what our production trends have been. Additionally, what our utilization and how the homeownership programs have looked. So that was very helpful. And this was all considered by the task force. And based on this information and with input from subject matter experts, which is not me, by the way, but I compile everything. Right now, the task force, as I'm speaking, is currently looking at a worksheet that says if we leverage our ARP funds in this way, and we know now that to produce affordable housing multifamily rentals cost X amount of dollars per unit, how many units should we be looking to produce? And if we want to commit ARP dollars, ARPA funds for this, how much would that be, right? Again, is it 100 million, state of Nevada for all of it? Should half of the money, if we say, let's commit $400 million, should $200 million go to multifamily development? Should $200 million go to affordable home ownership? So those are the things that the task force is currently working on right now as I'm speaking. I work with them through a poll, and I'm going to give you an idea here of the poll that's out along with the worksheet and the questions that I've asked them. And so they are giving their feedback, and we're meeting tomorrow to discuss this. And what we'll do next is take their recommendations from the task force, and the Nevada Housing Coalition Board of Directors will consider this and all of the work that's gone in to those recommendations, and additionally aligning with the Nevada Housing Coalition mission, of course, and priorities, will land on a final number. And we're working with KPS 3 to help us put together a 2 to 3 sheeter to make it easy for all of us to talk about affordable housing and the difference that ARPA funds may make in Nevada's affordable housing shortage. So that is really where we are with the ARPA funds. I do anticipate a rather large dollar figure coming out, and I do want to thank our congressional delegates for these funds. They will be making a difference in Nevada. They already are. And we're appreciative, but we do want to see some of these funds designated specifically to affordable housing. So I do also want to say how you can keep in touch. So make sure you sign up, email me if you want more information, but please tune in. I do anticipate releasing our recommendation in the next couple of weeks. And like all of you, I'm going to also go into the Google Forms at the end of the Every Nevadan Recovery Framework and submit our recommendation to Nevada leadership, along with providing educational pieces and information for all the work done. So what you should do, once we release our recommendation, I hope that you'll all support it. You see the heavy effort that has gone in, and a lot of thought, data-driven, multi-sector, private, public at the table, local elected officials, local governments, working together to make sure we coordinate these dollars and deploy them. Another important question, we're not going to ask for money we don't think we can deploy. Okay, so I'm not going to say even $100 million if we don't think we can get that money out the door. So that's been a question that our task force has really taken into consideration as well. So we're hoping that you will log in and support the Nevada Housing Coalition recommendation. Absolutely, we encourage everyone to submit your own ideas, and hopefully those fall within our 4 buckets, which, by the way, the 4 buckets right now that the task force is considering: affordable housing, multifamily development, with an emphasis or not an emphasis, but for rentals, with considerations of set aside funding potentially for permanent supportive housing and or units below 30% area median income. Additionally, preservation of affordable housing, that includes acquisition and rehab and rehabilitation dollars. They're considering those separately. Affordable home ownership, expanding our down payment assistance program, potentially development, which is not something we've done a lot of here in the state, but we actually have 2 pending projects that, but for the funding, could be moving forward right now in both the north and south. And then finally, land, which would be really a pilot initiative. But land is something that we've heard over and over again is a barrier. And we are understanding how that could look for an investment of ARPA funds to secure land for future affordable housing. So here's what we suggest, and you'll be seeing more from us coming up here in the next couple of weeks. So here is my information. I do want to just give a huge shout out to the task force members. They've been working hard and giving me feedback and humoring me with my polls. The information analysis provided by Enterprise Community Partners, Corporation for Supportive Housing, and the Nevada Housing Division has been super helpful. So if anyone has any questions or wants to get connected more closely with this initiative and or just connect with me separately to learn more, please feel free to reach out to me. My information, christine.hess@nvhousingcoalition.org, my email. I think you all have it now anyway. So again, thank you, Dr. Retzel with the Guinn Center. Thank you, Mendy Elliott with Capital Partners. So appreciate you all for joining us, and thank you all for joining us today. The slides will be provided, and we will also have the recording provided. So thank you.